as a Black woman in America who had parents that grew up in Jim Crow, I've known what it's like to have people be against you for simply being who you are.
When I think of grace, when I think of extending someone grace, it's like extending grace to them, like, because they were imperfect. You don't need grace when, like, you nailed it.
Right. Right. I really appreciate a lot of your nuanced stances. When I do give a super nuanced response, people get mad because people always want you to pick a side. Like, everything truly is not black and white. There's a whole lot of gray out there. There's a whole lot of gray. And people are afraid to explore it and to just live in it and discuss it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Psychobabble. My name is Joe Nucci, and today I'm very, very excited to share a conversation I had with Malynda Hale. Malynda and I connected over socials, and I was really, really excited to have her on the show because she struck me as someone who was super righteous in what she believed. Had some beliefs similar to me, some different, but also really open to dialogue and really like involved in the comments. And it was done in a way that really inspired me. And I think that that is what we need more of in this world. And so I'm really excited to talk to you about anything and everything. Malynda, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. I felt the same way about your page, so I'm glad we were able to connect.
Totally. What was, do you recall, what was the first video or topic that kind of caught your eye? Because I think you commented on my stuff before we got connected.
Yeah, there were a couple ones, but the main one was people not having the capacity to talk about Israel and Palestine. And I really loved that video because I've talked about it quite a bit. And I've realized that it is one of those things that people do shut off immediately, and it has become a very binary situation when I actually think it is incredibly nuanced, and it is something that people should be talking about. And I love that people want to get involved in something and they're passionate, but I think that there are a lot of facets in this situation that a lot of people are afraid to discuss, or a lot of things that they're not coming to terms with about themselves with how they're responding to this situation. And so I just really loved the video that you posted about that because it resonated with a lot of the things that I had said over the last year and a half.
Yeah.
A couple years, actually, but last year and a half specifically, yeah.
And when you say the last year and a half, is it specifically something you started speaking out about after October 7th, or is it a more just kind of broad cultural commentary? Because I think you could argue that this is happening with lots of different topics and events.
For sure. I mean, I, in general, have talked about anti-Semitism and this conflict with Israel and Palestine for almost 4 or 5 years at this point. So I was a very rare one. I feel like I can say, I think a lot of people didn't even really know the full scope of everything happening in the Middle East until October 7th. But I obviously did speak out after October 7th, and I got a lot of traction in those conversations as well. And that's been interesting, I will say. Yeah.
What initially drew you to the topic? Are you Jewish?
I'm not. You know, I have a lot of Jewish friends. I personally have always been an advocate for Black Jewish unity because I feel like there are a lot of parallels with our histories. While not identical, you know, no one's history is identical, but I think that for me, there's a natural empathy that should be there given what both communities have gone through in their respective homes. And so that is something that I've always been passionate about in my advocacy and in the work that I've done. And so it was always easy for me to speak up about anti-Semitism because as a Black woman in America who had parents that grew up in Jim Crow, I've known what it's like to have people be against you for simply being who you are. And so I really have always stood up for the Jewish community because I feel people, first and foremost, people don't realize that being Jewish is an ethno-religion. It's not just a religion. I think people don't realize there are people born Jewish just as I am born Black. And so that was one of the things that I definitely educated people on, that they're being hated for who they are, and there's not a lot of inclusion in advocacy work when it comes to the Jewish community. So I just wanted to, if I was going to practice what I preached, I had to include them in my advocacy because they're just as important.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel I'm not Jewish either, for those who are listening that don't know that. Sometimes people mistakenly think that I am. I think for me, it was actually just a past relationship with a boyfriend who I was very serious with, and it was actually witnessing anti-Semitism like to his face, like in person. And this was pre-October 7th, and it always stuck with me even after the relationship ended, because I was like, what the actual hell? Like, it was just so like one of those things where it's like, you'd think we're in New York City or we're in Los Angeles or wherever we were, and it didn't happen a lot, but the times that it happened, I always found to be quite eye-opening. And I remember when him and I talked about it, there was this sentiment of, obviously we wish that wasn't happening and that we didn't go through that, but he was always said the same thing each time it ever came up, which is, I'm actually really glad you got to see it, because you'll believe me and you'll believe us. And so when everything happened October 7th, and for me, I do support Israel, like, as America's ally, but I don't consider myself an expert in geopolitics. I don't consider myself an expert in that region. I started speaking up because of the general, I was going to say the West, but I'm specifically focused on America and the United States. The reaction that immediately came out that was anti-Israel, was just, for me, I still scratch my head at it sometimes, because I think to myself, how can all of these people not understand that they have permanently fractured? This is one of my beliefs. They've permanently fractured progressive and liberal discourse and activism with this hypocrisy. How can they not see it?
Yeah.
How can they not see it? And I think, a different video I put out, I said something like, people will say I'm Zionist isn't the same thing as anti-Semitism. And I try to compare that with different countries, like saying, well, I don't hate Americans, I just hate America. But I think it would be, after that video, I had another thought, which was, and maybe I should shoot it, but it's kind of like saying, I don't hate black people, I just hate BLM. I'm very anti-BLM. Now, you can have criticisms of BLM, like, for sure. And like, based on what I know, like, some people have some cogent criticisms, but to identify as anti-BLM and then insist that you're not racist, like, that feels a little suspect to me.
Right.
Like, I don't know. I don't know. You know what I'm saying?
I totally know what you're saying. It's interesting just talking about the BLM thing in general. I wrote an article called Black Lives Matter versus Black Lives Matter, and there's a difference in the capitalization. And I talked about how it's fine if you do have criticism of the organization, but no one should be against the phrase. No one should be against the phrase. And I think that people tend to, again, we oddly live in a very binary world, even though a lot of left and progressives are trying to get people out of the binary. And so when you choose it's one or the other, it's like, well, no, let's look at the nuance of this. Like, you can have criticisms of this, but you're also saying this at the same time. So I love that you did bring that up, because I've talked about that often as well.
Yeah, totally. Well, let's talk more about some of the kind of like the mental and emotional facets that are at play here when people struggle to talk about these things. So one of the things I've talked about when we first got connected was, it's been my observation that some people just don't really seem to have the emotional capacity. And I want to double click on what that means, because it's not necessarily me saying that this person is like defective in their emotional capacity. It could also mean, oh, well, you're actually just tired because you had a long day, or you're not sleeping very well. And one of the theories that I think about a lot in my private practice is this idea of what we might loosely call cognitive overload. I haven't seen a lot of people write about it, so I don't know what the formal terminology is, or if it's even something being studied. But it's this idea that you're going to have capacity for complexity. You're going to have higher capacity for complexity at certain times more than others. And so there's been some research, for example, showing that therapy is more effective in the morning. Why? Well, you're ready to go there, right? Like, doing the work, whether it's like the cognitive kind of thinking about your thoughts work, or like the deep emotional work, it takes energy, it takes calories, and your brain it's a calorie efficient organ, like they all are. It wants to bring you back to homeostasis, and it wants to bring you back to that. And so I think that there's the physiological factors I get really interested in terms of me picking my moments. And then there's also well, where are you at on your journey learning about this issue? Like, did you start getting involved like just a year ago, from TikTok?
Right.
Right. Do you have a more personal connection? Do you have a loved one that you've talked this through? Maybe it's more like academic or whatever it is. And so I think for me, it's been it's been tricky because I'm very outspoken and unapologetically so on my platform. But then in my personal life, I kind of feel like I have to pick my moments. Because if the context isn't set up for it, you could do more harm than good. I think you could put people on the defensive, or it's just not required in mixed company sometimes. And of course, I mean, it depends on what triggers it, but
Are you a homebody as well?
I am not. I'm the opposite of whatever that is.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm very much a homebody. So it's when you said that about your personal life, just having the capacity. I don't have the capacity in my personal life.
Right. Well, it's a
I
really
like to
excellent
stay home and just
point.
be with my family, and I don't want to deal with anything outside of my home. Yeah.
Oh, totally. No, I mean, I've taken, so many personality tests at this point, but whenever I do, I'm in like the 90 percentiles of extroversion, and well, I go to sleep usually listening to like a podcast or Netflix because hearing people talk is like regulating or something.
Interesting. That's so interesting. But in terms of capacity and even just speaking up on the left, let's say, that has been really, really vocal about a lot of issues lately, what I have realized in conversations and also just observations is that everybody wants to be a part of something. And I think also certain people don't have the capacity to want to be a part of something, right? And it's not even just the conversation. It's being a part of a movement or being a part of a collective. Some people are very just individualistic and want to worry about themselves, and so they can't think about others, or they can't. And I don't think it's even from a selfish standpoint. I think it's like, I'm really just trying to take care of myself in this moment, so I can't extend to other people. So I do have empathy for that, because I have a big capacity for caring for people. I have a big capacity for advocacy in my work in digital media. But like I said, like, I'm not going to be the one that's like going to go out to march for people. I'm just not. You will never see me at a protest. I also have two kids, so like I also have to think about them as well.
Sure.
But I'm not the person. You want me to go do like the women's march? I'm not the girl. So everyone has their boundaries, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate the distinction of the pull to be part of something larger than yourself that's at play, and then the curiosity of like, but what are the other things happening in your life that will either enhance your willingness to go be part of that thing or that movement, or prevent it. And to your point, it's like, oh, like, I have children, I have family, or maybe you have a public facing job. It's like, I actually can't comment on these things, and for good reason. It's like, hey, fair enough. But then there's this other part of me that's also sometimes suspicious that people that out of nowhere get really, really involved in some of these things. And I want to choose my words carefully here, because I don't want to sound overly critical of people that choose to get involved in issues of social justice or things that matter to them. But sometimes I'm curious. I'm kind of like, is everything good with you in your personal life? Like, because this came out of nowhere. Or is this only something I see you share to your stories on Instagram, and then when I'm with you, you're actually like, you seem perfectly, pleasant and well adjusted, and maybe it's just because you can compartmentalize. I don't know. But then there's some people who can't compartmentalize, and then I'm kind of like, you've been bringing this up a lot, and this is we're at a bar. I don't know if this is the right time.
It is interesting what resonates with people. I will say that, especially when there are similarities with certain situations. There's things happening all over the world, so you never know what clicks with a certain person and why. And I do find that interesting. It's also like what we're interested in. Certain people like certain music for some reason, and I'll hear the song and be like, "Why do you like this?" I think it just depends on the person. But I get what you're saying, because sometimes I have noticed there's like this aggression with an obsessiveness with whatever people are latching onto. So I fully understand what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious to hear from your perspective. I've always had this hypothesis, if you will, that one of the roles that therapy and the mental health community can play in activism, whether it's on the left or right, or it doesn't even matter what cause it is I believe that the better regulated you are, as in like the more psychological sophistication you have over like your thoughts, your feelings, your expression or lack thereof, etc., the better the activist or advocate you will be to the things that matter to you. And as someone that does this just in her work and in her life, I'm wondering if A, if you agree or disagree and why, but then B, if therapy or coaching or anything mental health related has guided you in that journey.
I am a huge advocate for therapy. I think it is incredibly important. I think it is necessary to be the best version of yourself, to be honest. I think I love my therapist personally. I really, really do. And I like having someone who is not involved in my life on a daily basis or doesn't follow me on social media, that is able to give me feedback that I need in a way that doesn't make me feel judged or like I'm trying to impress them or whatever the case may be. They're just very honest, hearing their perspective, hearing my perspective. You know what I mean? So I'm a huge advocate for therapy. I'm constantly telling people to go to therapy. I mean, telling my parents that are in their 70s, go to therapy. It's never too late. It's never too late. And especially
True.
my parents, I'm going to be honest, my parents have a lot of unresolved trauma from growing up in Jim Crow in the South that they haven't dealt with.
Yeah.
And I see it. I didn't understand it growing up. I just thought my dad hated everybody. I didn't get it. But then now that I'm older and I've been involved in more activism and advocacy, I'm like, he grew up in Mississippi in 1944. Just that sentence alone, you can already imagine the things that he witnessed and experienced, right? But he's never properly dealt with them. He's never properly talked about them and healed. And I think that's what's important about therapy, is giving yourself the opportunity to heal, because you don't want to carry around all of that heaviness. And I've learned so much about myself. I've, learned a lot about my relationships. I've adjusted a lot of my relationships in a positive way and adjusted my way of thinking. One of the best things that I have learned is that you can't change people. You can only change how you react to them. And I think that's been very, very important for me in just my life. That may not be for everybody, but I am a huge advocate for it.
And do you feel like it's helped you be a better advocate, activist for the causes and the things that you believe in?
I do, and I think so a couple of things. I think it's oddly enough helped me have even more empathy than I feel like I already had, and the ability to listen. But it's also helped me with conversations with people across the aisle, to be honest, because there's something within them. Let's say I'm talking to an angry person, right? You're on social media. We always get them. We get them in the comments, right? It helps me, instead of responding in kind, respond with a little bit more compassion, to kind of understand what's making you so angry. Why are you responding to me this way? And having those tools has been really helpful in this work. As you have a growing platform on social media, you're going to get all people from all walks of life, and you don't know what their backstory is. You don't know what their history is. You don't know what they're going through that day. They could have gotten in a car accident. They could have gotten in a fight with their loved one, and they're taking it out on you because you said one sentence that just happened to upset them in that moment. And so I try to really remember that everybody is a human. Everybody has their own ish that they're going through, and that's been very beneficial for me. Yeah,
absolutely. All of that, and something that I'm reminding myself of, particularly if the person doesn't follow me, it's like, oh, this video is their only knowledge of me. And particularly if the video, because I think if you've watched many of my videos, you know that it's like I am playful. I'll be sensational or really toned down or this or whatever. I like to give kind of a variety of approaches when I talk about the things that I talk about. And so it's always a great reminder for me to be like, oh, this person only knows this 30 seconds of me. Yeah. One of the best pieces of advice that was given to me when I started taking media more seriously is that they say, this person said to me, they said, when something has more than 500 views, which they all do, way more than that, right? They said, it's not about you anymore. Ooh. That person, you created an avatar, a product, and it's your face, it's your voice. It may even be your belief or your idea, but it's not you, and you have to go let it live and interact with people where they're at on their journey, or depending on how many videos they've seen of you or have not seen of you, or whatever it is. And I remember thinking that was so wise and profound. And then recently I had this thought, and it's coming up again now, which is why I'm sharing it, which is I think that's also true for just like life. You know, like you're interacting with someone like on the subway or on a dating app or like at a party or like whatever it is. And it's just like, you don't actually know them.
Yeah.
You know them in this moment.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's always been a helpful reframe to kind of keep it toned down.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's beautiful. And also, I think we all know that social media obviously is never the full picture of a person. Sometimes it's just the highlight reel, or sometimes it's all the sad and angry things. And I think that people forget that we as humans contain multitudes, and, you know, we're sharing what we feel comfortable with. You know, I don't share my family on social media, and that's a personal choice. Some people, all they do is share their family, right? But then I don't know what they do for work, or I don't know what hobbies they're interested in. You know, I think that we have to remember that, and I'm glad you said that, because I think I needed to remember that as well. It was beautiful.
Yeah, totally, for sure. Well, you know, something that I've talked about before, and I need to keep talking about it because it's so easy to forget, is that, you know, you can have done so much work, and you can have all this awareness and all these tools, but then, you know, it's so easy to just get caught up in the water that you swim in your life. And, you know, and if you're tired and it's the end of the day, or, you know, like the right person said the right thing or the wrong thing, you know, at the perfect moment, and it kind of like brings out like whatever it is in you, I think it's a really, I think it's a good reminder for all of us, you know, to just remember that this isn't, that we're fluid. I want to run something else by you that's coming up for me. So I gave this hypothesis. Her name is Neha, at Indian Sex Therapist. We had a really lovely conversation where I gave this hypothesis to her, and I want to know if you agree or disagree with the thesis. I've been trying really hard to take my knowledge and competency of working with individuals and help me better understand like the things that are happening right now in culture and that are unfolding all around us. And I have been mulling over this thought about trauma and identity politics. And for me, it always, I guess I just asked the question one day. I was like, but why these identities, right? Like in this way, you know, like, and like, yes, of course, there's the historical stuff, et cetera, but like, why does this seem so psychologically appealing to people? Because for me personally, identity politics and related rhetoric never really spoke to me, even though I may agree with like the policy, or like, you know, I could maybe criticize, as you said, the organization, but like the underlying intent I always like got. But there was something about identity politics that just never really sat right with me. And one of my ideas was that if you are a black woman or a gay man, or pick whatever minority group you want, and you experience some sort of bigotry, it doesn't even necessarily have to be like physical. Like, let's just say it's emotional. And it was very, I was going to say scarring, but that's not the word I want. It was very formative in your experience. Maybe you were like a young person, and it was an experience with a police officer or a homophobe or a teacher, or like whatever it is that happens. Maybe it only happens once. It probably happens more than once. And over time, the way we know trauma kind of cognitively affects the brain is that it will start to make these schemas. It'll start to kind of make these frameworks to prevent you from engaging in behaviors or ways of thinking in hopes that the trauma won't happen again. So a very basic example of this is that you get into a car accident, right? It's very common for someone with PTSD after a car accident to not want to get in a car.
Right.
And in their mind's defense, well, that's a great way to make sure they never get into a car accident again. But it's not adaptive, because eventually, well, what if you need to get to the airport, you know, or what if you need to run errands, or like whatever it is, right? And so, but over time, these neuro associations, they kind of get more broad, and they can encapsulate people with full-blown identities. So once I was treating a patient, a survivor of sexual assault, and she had all this shame because she said, you know, I've been lashing out at men, but it's specifically men that it had just one feature in common. We were able to put it together, like her attacker. You know, it's like if they were around the same height, you know, same hair color, same mannerisms or whatever it is, it would really send her into this state of fight or flight. And I had to do that psychoeducation with her. I had to, one, normalize it, like this happens to a lot of people. But two, you know, part of trauma treatment after establishing like safety is you want to empower people to start to kind of walk back those associations because again, like that's not adaptive, you know, like, yes, if you never speak to a man again, like maybe that would help you not get assaulted again, but it's also possible that you just still will, you know? And so I was thinking about that, about how that works with trauma in the brain. And I was starting to think about identity politics, and you're nodding, so I feel like you see where I'm going with this. And I'm wondering if maybe some of the reasons why a lot of these public conversations and a lot of this activism, it can feel so binary and black and white. It can feel so all or nothing. And I know that in my community, I know that there are gay people who, you know, they would prefer to never interact with straight people, and they work at gay establishments and they live in the gayborhood, et cetera, et cetera. And it's kind of like, yes, maybe you like statistically you might experience less homophobia if that's your life. But is that limiting you like in your life, or are you doing this because it's a choice, or is it because you're locked into it? And so I guess I just want to know what you think of that in your experience, just with your identity, your history, like your parents. You talked about them going through trauma and that really informing like their beliefs and their attitudes. And I guess I'm just curious to hear if you agree or pick it apart or whatever comes up.
This is deep. This runs deep. And I've actually had similar conversations about this. And obviously, I shouldn't say obviously because you didn't know this, but I grew up in an all-white town in Santa Barbara.
Okay.
And I didn't realize what I had experienced in terms of racism and microaggressions until I was much older. But I will say that it didn't cause me to have any trauma responses or triggers whatsoever. I mean, I'm in an interracial marriage. I've been with my husband's white. I've been with him for 15 years. If that were the case, I would have never even allowed him to talk to me, you know? Right, you know? But I will say, as a Black woman that has experienced quite a bit of racism in my 38 years of life, I don't want to speak for the Black community, but I think I can say this is a lot of our experience. There is a fear of, when it comes to black and white, you were talking about binary, and this is a literal black and white thing. There is a fear when you interact with a white person that you don't know what type of white person they are, because you don't know what their parents' history is, and you don't know what's being passed down. And what I've tried to explain to a lot of my white friends and white people that are wanting to understand race relations is that Black people don't dislike white people because of the color of their skin, or they don't want to talk to white people because of the color of their skin. There's a fear there because of history, because there is an uncertainty. If at any given moment you might say something or do something that has an underlying racist tone, or something that you heard or something that your parents said. So I think it's interesting to talk about this, because I think, at least for my community, I don't feel like we've been given the grace to talk about this, or the understanding of why we have these responses, because there's just no way to know. It's literally a fear that you don't know if at the drop of a hat. Because I've had that happen. I've had many friendships where I've been friends with these people, known them, gone to school with them, we've hung out, and all of a sudden they'll say something that is just stop me in my tracks. Like, wait, what? Like, did you not realize the color of my skin? You know what I mean? And so I'm kind of getting off on a little bit of a tangent here, but what is I guess I'm trying to remember exactly what the question is that you're asking, because I could go off on a tangent about this.
I guess I'm just curious, the connection between lived experience, trauma, and how it may or may not manifest in identity politics, as we understand that colloquially. Gosh, again, this is so deep, and this is a heavy conversation.
When you say identity politics, what do you mean specifically?
I mean it in this conversation, I mean it in the broadest sense possible.
Okay.
And I think what I mean is people who, whether it's through culture or policy or conversation, situate and prioritize group identity as the preferred and like superordinate way to understand a dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to the Black community, it's hard because no group is a monolith, right? We do have our individual aspects, but I think with the Black community, like, our culture is what brings us together. And the reason that we've created our culture was because of what we went through, right? We didn't know where we came from. We don't really know our heritage, our history. Like, I could not tell you what region in Africa my ancestors came from. It's a privilege to know that. We don't know that. So we had to create our own culture in order to bring us together so that trauma wasn't the only thing that connected us. You know what I mean? So I don't necessarily think it's a negative thing when you have like this groupthink situation. If you let it be the only thing that defines you and how you go through the world, I can see that being a problem. But I do think that I think my community has a unique situation because we're the only race in this country that has the history that we do. Does that make sense?
It does. And I'm really struck, the word that really stood out to me earlier is you saying that when so often I mean, awkwardness isn't quite the right word for it, but if there's tension or awkwardness or something about an interracial dynamic, whether it's just passing on the street or a friendship or in the workplace or whatever it is, you used the word grace earlier, and it really stuck out to me. It's like, oh, like the grace to be able to be like, I'm having a fear response because I don't have enough data or context or information. I don't know, like, I guess it's just no one had ever quite put it that way before for me, specifically in the theme of grace. And it's like, yeah, like, when I think of grace, when I think of extending someone grace, it's like extending grace to them, like, because they were imperfect or messy or made it worse or better or like whatever it is, you know what I mean? It's like, you don't need grace when like you nailed it.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
And so,
absolutely. Yeah. Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah. So something that is often talked about right now on the right, on social media, on different podcasts, et cetera. And there was just a lovely study that came out of Nature that showed that one of the main psychological differences between people on the left and people on the right was to what extent they prioritize in-group preference. And so there was this like really interesting, like almost like a heat map with concentric circles. And the more red, the more your preference was put on, whether it's like you as an individual, your family, your community, and then all the way out to like animals and plants and like the universe. And it was very interesting because people on the right, conservatives, preferred their in-group more.
Yeah.
Right. And then people on the left, actually, it was, if I'm remembering correctly, it was more evenly distributed, but even like biased towards out-group, which I thought was very interesting.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm just, I'm thinking about it because I guess I'm wondering, how do you understand that? Because I think that on one hand, I think my current thinking on it is that that's a vital distinction. And it also seems to me to be a potentially convenient way to kind of like intellectually like get out of talking about how like, well, there are racist people though. You know, like you know what I mean? Like it's kind of like
sure.
like you can't get out of in-group preference regardless of what race you are or are not, right? And you know, there's that other piece of it. And so I guess I was just kind of curious. I don't know if you're familiar with this talking point, but it's
no, but it's fascinating, and it also kind of doesn't surprise me if we're gonna be, you know, it doesn't really surprise me. I think, and you did a video about this, about the faults with the right, like why if you don't want to be a part of this group, why are you still attracting them? And I loved that video too. It was such a great video. I think what is interesting about the differences between the right and the left is that the right, like you said, you know, the in-group, they're very, very aligned no matter what. They're just very aligned. And I actually think, gosh, I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying this. As a progressive left, I feel like we're inclusive to a fault. And it's because we have so many individuals that we are trying to cater to, which I think is, I fully believe in my heart of hearts, there is a seat at the table for everybody. But the problem is that everybody wants their table to be the main table. And I think that that's where we get into trouble. And I think that the right is like, this is the table, so you either come here or you can leave. It's like that simple for them, And I wish that the left found a way. I've actually said this before, and people are like, you should actually do this. I kind of wish the left would turn All Lives Matter onto it on its head and actually turn that into their messaging. And that be the thing, like, all lives matter. Because
interesting.
You have all of these groups that are on the left and that are progressive and that do want to advocate for everybody, but they do still have this individualistic mindset. So that should actually be the left slogan, is that all lives matter. And I think it'd be interesting to see them kind of flip it in a positive way, because that was created as a retort to Black Lives Matter, right? It wasn't, It was never a thing before. But like, well, why don't we make it a thing? Why don't we actually make it a thing? And then that's our messaging, I know, I see the little light bulb.
I mean, I don't know. Well, I don't know if I'm going to get in trouble for agreeing with you, but I think I agree with you, because I think one of the things that's really harming the left in the broadest sense, is, like I said, I think that there's, over the last couple of years, like a lot of like the rhetorical and philosophical and moral inconsistencies and hypocrisies have just been so in the forefront of anyone who pays attention to these issues, that I think that actually doing something really bold like that is it's very strategic from a social media perspective, number one. And the left is not good at social media. Like, they just aren't.
They aren't. No, they aren't. And I think a lot of them know that they aren't. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad they're finally waking up to it, because, I'm a Manhattan boy. Like, I'm around, progressives all the time. I consider myself, like, classical liberalism is probably the closest thing I identify with. But, and I don't, whether that's on the left or right, I think is an ongoing question in today's rapidly changing world. But I remember before the election, I was saying to people, I was like, look, I spend all day on Instagram. Like, I do. Like, it's my vocation. It's like, I think he's going to win. Like, I think I think they're doing, like, whether you think it's propaganda or better arguments, like, I don't care, like, whatever you believe, like, they're just better at it. And people rolled their eyes. They got mad at me. Their jaws hit the floor. And then when the results came in, I have to say, it was this wonderful feeling of, like, I told you so.
Yeah.
Because I was like, and my hope was that maybe you'll start to listen. Back to I'm tangenting though, back to what you were saying. I think it makes sense, the All Lives Matter thing, in the sense that it would justify a lot of the things that the right criticizes them for. So it would justify the ever-expanding LGBTQIA umbrella, because all of them, right, matter. It would justify their stances on environmentalism, right? Like, against gun, like, all of this stuff. And so I think there's something there. Will they do it? I'm highly doubtful, but I think that there's something bold and interesting about it.
I do. And I've said this on a couple of lives before, and I've said it in my stories, and people are like, no, you actually should do this. And I'm like, I don't have the time, but I think it could be very interesting. And like you said, bold. I mean, take a risk, do it. But it's using their words against them. If you're really trying to fight back, I will say, the right is very good at fighting back. They're very good at simple messaging, and we need to do that. I'm saying we because I do consider myself a liberal and a progressive. We're just, like you said, we're not good at it. We're just not. We're just not. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think, I was watching this interview, I'm forgetting her name, but she's like a speaker in the House of Commons in England, Black woman, I believe grew up between England and, I want to say, Nigeria, but I might be getting the country in Africa wrong. Anyways, it doesn't matter. The point is she gives this interview where she talks about why she identifies as a conservative. And her argument is, she says, I'm trying to conserve the principles of classical liberalism that I think, like, make the West and, like, make all these countries so great. And it really struck me in a particular way, because I hadn't heard someone to date define conservatism in that way. And my current thinking on it, I would love to know what you think, is my current thinking is that the only way that is not a sufficient definition is if we believe there is room for classical liberalism on the left, alongside like what we might label as progressivism.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that there is, if I'm being honest. I think it obviously depends on like where you are regionally and like what level of like the political like machine you're involved in. But I guess I'm kind of wondering, what's your hit on that? Because because for me too, it's like I'm not attached to the label. I'm like, I'll be like whatever idea is good, I'll identify as.
Right.
But I think that's really hard for people to be as flexible with. So I'm curious.
Absolutely is difficult for people to be that flexible. I haven't heard that either. I obviously have heard like conservatives want to conserve, progressives want to progress, right? So
Right.
this is very interesting to me. You know, I think as of late, I would say a lot of progressives and liberals are leaning more to the center anyway, because we're realizing how people call, the blue MAGA or the alt left, how much they're not as open as they're requesting everybody else to be, So I'm not sure if that would be a welcomed ideology, to take the forefront for progressiveness. It's interesting, though. I'd love to hear that speech. That sounds fascinating.
Yeah, I'll be able to find it and send it to you. I thought one of the other things that was so interesting, and as she was justifying her point, was she was saying that where she grew up in Africa, it was multicultural in the sense that there were people from all these different like regions of the African continent, but it was one ethnicity. Yet there was still all this conflict, and so she has a really fascinating perspective on like the pitfalls of multiculturalism. And I think that also kind of contributes to her conservative philosophy, because she was saying like, listen, like I grew up in a place where we all looked the same, and it was still violent and messy and full of conflict. And so I always thought that was very it's a very, very interesting perspective.
Absolutely.
One that I hadn't heard.
Me neither.
Yeah.
I would love to hear that.
I mean, I think that if the left, and again, we're speaking in such broad strokes here, but if the left knows what's good for it, I think they will try to build a bigger tent. But I think it's, for me, as someone that has so desperately wanted to identify on the left, like due to my queerness and due to many of my beliefs, I always I've experienced it ever since I had my initial kind of political consciousness birthed back in college. I've always experienced it as a culture in which, if I'm going to say something that's not in step with the dogma, I have to say it super, super carefully and articulately.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, you look at the right and it is just the complete opposite. Like you can't even believe it. Like you just can't even believe like all the crazy stuff people are saying, but it's like working in like a weird way. At least culturally it is. I think that one kind of turn of phrase I've been playing with, and you identify as a Christian, so I'm wondering what you think of this, is the way it was this interview with like Ivanka, and she was talking about how like, she doesn't, care what your politics are. That's not the most important thing to her as a friend. And she just, wants to see like the merits in everybody. And I go to the comment section and it's like all these people being like, well, you're really privileged for being able to think of it like this. And like, and like, it was all this stuff. And basically a lot of people did not like her take. Right. But one of the things that it struck me is it was actually like, well, and, I grew up around a lot of like Catholics and a lot of Christians, and when they're trying to get you to come to church, and I straight up joined this youth group because we had a neighbor who had kids my age, and she actually had like Ivanka vibes. You know what I mean? She was like, "Oh my God, you'll love it. Everyone's welcome. Like it doesn't matter how into it, or like come," and it just felt good.
Yeah.
And it was like, and it's like the evangelizing like aspect of it, and it's funny to me because I feel like sometimes people on the left are as ideologically rigid as some of the most like evangelical Christians I've ever come across, but they don't do that part right. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like, it's not good psychology is what it is. Like,
I don't even know where to begin with the Christian evangelicalism. That's like another podcast conversation.
Yeah. All right, totally.
But it's interesting because the all are welcome, and that phrase is said by a lot of churches. And it's an on the surface statement that after you kind of deep dive into what their theology truly is, it's like, do you really mean that? because you don't accept the LGBTQ community, or you won't let women serve, or, there's so many other things. So it's having been in this world and not in this world anymore. I still identify as a Christian, but I will stay far away from the church as long as I possibly can, to be honest. I've realized that phrases to get you in the doors, but they don't really, it's interesting. They don't really do much to keep you there. They tell you you're welcome, but then they don't really make you feel welcome. And that's a huge issue that I have with specifically a lot of conservative evangelical Christians. And then they figure out how to get a lot of money. This is just a fact. They figure out a way to get a lot of money, and that's about it. There isn't a huge focus on service. There isn't a huge focus on really teaching the principles and life teachings of what Jesus taught. So, that's been a frustrating thing for me. I'm not one of the people that, luckily, I've never had to deconstruct. I don't know if you know much about the deconstruction movement.
I'm familiar with the phrase, actually.
Yeah,
yes.
and so it's really people, and are the ex-evangelicals. I never had to go through that. I actually was very lucky that I grew up in a very progressive Christian household. I wasn't really exposed to conservative Christianity and evangelicalism until I went to college. And I always joke that because I went to a Christian college, I went in liberal and I came out super, 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 super liberal, because I was like, these people are crazy. So that is an interesting, demographic, I will say, for sure. Yeah.
I mean, the point is well taken, that it's like, is it just marketing?
Yeah.
Or is it just to get you in the door, to get your money, to get your vote, for applying it to a more of a political context? What came up for me, though, and I hope you don't take offense to this, because I don't think it's something that you were doing super overtly, but I want to call it out because I see it a lot on the left, is in your thinking through it, you kind of mention it's like, oh, but you don't mean what you say, and therefore, and I do, and therefore I am better than that tactic.
Yeah.
And I think, and totally, and fair enough, and you might as well be. I'm not even discounting it, but I just feel like a lot of the progressive left, in my experience with them, at least in the last year, is it's like you're just the most righteous losers, right? Because it's kind of it was kind of like when people didn't storm the Capitol, and they were like, see, well, at least we didn't do this, and part of me was like, but you thought it was fascism. I was kind of hoping you would storm the Capitol, because let me tell you something, they would have.
Right.
Because they believed it was a communist dictatorship takeover.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They literally believe that. And so I think for me, it's, I guess I'm just kind of curious to hear your feedback, because I sensed it, and it's something that happens in much more, overt examples.
Yeah. No, I will say, for me, saying that specifically in talking about Christianity, because that's what my experience has been. I have seen it in action. When I was in New York, I was a worship leader at a church that I will not name, and I saw the messaging and the marketing, but then the internal actual goal, or the theology that they believed in, right? And so I see the contradiction of what the outward facing message is, and then what the actual inner workings of the church is. So I am fully speaking from experience. However, I will agree that you do see that righteousness on the left. And I think what plays a part in that is that you end up seeing data, for example, that does say that Democrats are more educated, in terms of actual 4-year college education. And I think that kind of goes to their heads a little bit. I'm going to be honest. I do. I think that there's I have a college degree, and it's yes, you do have a college degree, but it is also the way that you present it. On the flip side, I think that when it comes to Christianity, for example, the right is very much, I'm a Christian. I'm the Christian. God, and so it's very, you're talking about it all the time, but you're not doing it. So I don't think the left needs to, talk about how better they are. Not that saying that they are, but you know what I'm saying? Just be better, do better, act better, you know, and same with Republicans and Christianity. Just be a good Christian. That's the one thing I just want them, like, just be a good Christian. Don't talk about it. Don't talk about the church. Don't talk about, if you always have to say something, it makes me question, like, the validity of your claim. You know what I mean? So yeah, I'm with you though.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, as we get towards the end of our time here, is there anything else that you were hoping to talk about, or any questions for me?
Any questions for you? Oh,
of course. You can ask me as many questions as you want.
I wasn't prepared for that. Well, again, I really appreciate a lot of your nuanced stances. I think that it's super important, and I think you get responses like I do sometimes when I do give a super nuanced response that people get mad, because people always want you to pick a side. And I really do hate that we're in this, it's the societal culture of having to always pick a side. Like, everything truly is not black and white. There's a whole lot of gray out there. There's a whole lot of gray, and people are afraid to explore it and to just live in it and discuss it. I guess my question for you is, what have you found to be a helpful tactic when having conversations with people that are very binary in their thinking, but you're trying to get them to see more of the gray area?
I'll answer it in two parts.
Okay.
We'll go macro then micro. So the macro part is something I've learned about, like, building a brand, like putting myself out there on social media, unlike other forms of media, is that you're not monolithic. The algorithm will take your videos based on the words you speak and the keywords in your caption and et cetera, and feed it to people that it thinks will engage with the video. That's why everyone's newsfeed these days, it's mostly recommended content, right? And so I bring that up to say that when I was talking to people who, like women, for example, who voted for Trump, their news feeds and their videos that they're sending me are videos of him talking about how important IVF is. And this, and they're like, you are all way too sensitive about this issue. We don't care. We're voting for him, right? But then I talked to, a girlfriend, who's really lefty progressive based in Brooklyn, and she's posting and sharing these horrible, like, misogynistic video, like, you know what I mean? And I guess I bring all that up to say is that whether it's moral or immoral, ethical or unethical, like whether it'll last forever, or this is just a brief paradigm that we're all, like, living through, like, we don't live in the same information ecosystems. Like, we just don't. And I am someone who spends a lot of time kind of scavenging the information ecosystem to inform the content or whatever I do. And I personally still feel like there is so much I don't even have time to tap into. And so I think reminding myself of that gives me a lot of, it helps me give people grace, particularly when it's something that I don't agree with, or I feel like I've seen contradicting evidence or whatever it is. So that's kind of like the macro perspective. And then the micro perspective, when people are very black and white, when I think about my experience as a therapist and I'm helping somebody break out of splitting or black and white thinking or working through, like, a very, like, rigid belief, it alludes to something it's related to something that I brought up earlier, which is that takes a lot of calories. Like, that takes energy. Because if you think about it, your mind wants to be energy efficient. And so it is, for example, it is much better for me to, if I have a new, like, routine in the gym, let's say, I do the same thing each day of the week, I just go. It takes so much more thinking to be like, okay, and, like, maybe I tweak it here and tweak it here and tweak it here. And so I bring that up because I think that my experience as a therapist has helped me appreciate that it's the black and white, like, schemas, or, like, very binary schemas we operate through the world with, are not inherently bad in themselves. They're bad when the behavior, if we're thinking about an individual, they're bad when the behavior is not bringing them the results that they want. That's the definition of dysfunction, broadly speaking, right? When their relationships or their emotions or their occupation or whatever it is just in disarray because they're thinking of it in this way, then we actually need to spend the energy on this, right? And so I don't know. I know it's not the most like direct answer to the question, but I'm always, like I said earlier, in my personal life with individuals, I'm picking my moment.
Yeah.
When if we're going out in Manhattan and you're like drunk in an Uber and you bring up, like Israel Palestine, like I'm not. It's not the moment. Even if I think of what you're saying is so ill-informed and dumb, like, it is just
like,
not.
It's not. Yeah.
And for anyone listening, let me just say this: that is so much easier said than done, right? Because of course, even me, who just gave the most articulate download of that concept that I could, even me, I'm sitting there and I'm just like, I have so many things I need to say to you about this,
right.
Yeah. But very similar to what we were talking about earlier, I think if you approach it with not just the competency of the facts that you have and like the knowledge and the stories that you have, but also like just like the warmth and the compassion, I think that's the best way.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know. What do you think about that? Do you have I was going to say clap back, but that's not what I'm trying to say.
I have plenty of
do you have any
those,
thoughts? Oh yeah.
It for me, I also have boundaries, I will say, because there does come a point, like you said, pick your moment, that if I feel like I'm about to curse or get upset, I have to pull myself back. There's too much back and forth, right? If people aren't seeing another perspective. But how I always enter into those conversations is trying to meet people where they're at. I'm really a huge advocate for that because I want to know what people know, what they believe, why they believe what they believe, and then I want to try to enter them into my belief system as well. Not necessarily to change their mind, but just to consider a different perspective. If you want to keep believing what you believe, whatever the case may be, that's fine. But consider that this is it's a possibility that you could be wrong, right? I am actually it sounds egotistical to say this, but I am a very humble person, and so I have no problem saying when I'm wrong. And I always tell people, if I'm wrong about this, tell me, and I'll correct it. And I've posted things before. Hey, I posted this. I was wrong. Don't share it. Whatever. I'll take it down. That's why this is gone. I have no problem saying it because I have no skin in the game in that sense. Like I don't have that level of an ego where I can't admit. But I just try to meet people where they're at and not get frustrated. Now, again, there are outside factors. If I've heard mommy 24 times in the last 30 seconds and my child is doing, and then somebody says something to me on Instagram, they might get all of that and I don't want them to. So I just have to, you know what I mean? So I try to do just like a temperature check for myself to see if I'm even able to engage and make sure that they're getting the best me that they can.
Yeah. All right. Well, we could totally keep on talking, but unfortunately we're going to wrap up and you'll have to come back so we can maybe double click on one of these topics. I really enjoy talking to you too. For those who are new to you, where can they find you? How can they keep up with you? Where are you located?
I am located on all the internets. So my website is malyndahale.com, MALYNDAHALE. And I also have a Substack that I'm very active with, and I have a community group called #WeNeedToTalk. So you can find that on Substack as well. And then, of course, on Instagram, just @MalyndaHale.
All right. And for those of you who are still watching or listening, please make sure to hit that like or subscribe button. And we hope to see you at the next one.